It was one of those rare moments in the House of Commons when the usual noise, the usual scripted exchanges, and the usual rehearsed arguments gave way to something far more raw and unpredictable. The chamber, often filled with the routine back and forth of political point scoring, suddenly turned into a stage for a confrontation that no one saw coming. Lucy Powell, a senior Labour figure, had taken her seat, ready to defend her party as she had done many times before. But what followed would push her beyond the limits of her composure. This was not just another debate, it was the kind of exchange that shifts the mood of a room, that leaves allies shaken and opponents energised. The House of Commons is never short of sharp words, but this time the sharpness cut deeper. The tension was not created by shouting or chaos, but by the precision of one MP who stood up and spoke with the kind of confidence that can silence even the loudest chamber. The words were aimed directly at Labour, and more specifically at Lucy Powell herself. It was the kind of attack that carried not only criticism, but also humiliation, and the way Powell reacted made it clear that the sting had landed. Viewers watching the broadcast could feel the electricity in the air. Every pause, every raised eyebrow, every glance across the benches told the story of a debate slipping out of Labour's control. Powell had faced tough challenges before, but this was different. The MP confronting her wasn't just arguing policy, he was dismantling her position piece by piece. And as the chamber watched, Powell's responses began to falter. Her tone, once firm and certain, became defensive, and her frustration started to show. What made this moment stand out was not only the words being exchanged, but the sense of imbalance in power. The MP speaking against Powell seemed to hold the entire room, while she struggled to regain her footing. Labour MPs sitting nearby shifted uneasily, some visibly uncomfortable at the way the debate was tilting. Every second stretched longer than the last, and the air was thick with the knowledge that something unusual was unfolding. Something that would be replayed, shared, and remembered far beyond the walls of Westminster. For Powell, the challenge was immediate. How to respond when the attack was not just sharp, but humiliating. When every word seemed designed to draw out a reaction. And as those watching soon saw, her reaction was not the calm and controlled rebuttal many expected. Instead, it was the kind of emotional slip that turns an exchange into a headline. In that moment, she did not appear as the confident spokesperson for Labour, but as a politician caught off guard, visibly rattled, and struggling to mask her anger. This was the spark. This was the beginning of a clash that would ripple through Parliament and beyond. The House of Commons thrives on moments of theatre, but sometimes the performance takes a turn that leaves even the actors unsure of what comes next. Lucy Powell was about to face one of those moments, and it would not be one she could walk away from without damage. The session in the House of Commons had begun like many others, with debates circling around the pressing issues of the day. The benches were filled, the air was restless, and the mood was tense as Labour MPs prepared to make their case against the government. Among them, Lucy Powell was ready to take her role as one of the party's leading voices, a figure trusted to challenge the opposition with clarity and strength. On paper, the day was supposed to be routine. Questions asked, answers given, accusations exchanged. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. Labour had been under pressure in recent weeks. Critics argued that their plans lacked strength, while their opponents wasted no opportunity to underline weaknesses in their arguments. It was against this backdrop that Powell entered the debate. Her position was important. She wasn't simply defending Labour policies, she was defending the party's credibility at a time when every slip mattered. For the MPs around her, it was vital that Powell projected confidence, that she stood firm and gave the impression of a party united and unshaken. But debates in Parliament rarely follow the script. When the session turned towards Labour's performance and promises, the mood began to shift. Members on the opposite benches leaned forward, ready for an opening to pounce. The speaker's voice faded into the background as anticipation filled the chamber. Then, almost casually, one MP rose to speak, a figure who would soon change the tone entirely. His words did not begin with noise or fire, but with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. Powell, seated and waiting, could not have expected that she would become the centre of this storm. She prepared herself, as she always did, to counter the usual arguments, to dismiss the usual taunts. But what came was not the usual. This MP had studied his target, had chosen his words carefully, and delivered them with a sharpness that turned the room against her. It was not just about Labour's policies, it was about Powell's defence of them, and about exposing the weaknesses she thought she had covered. The chamber responded almost instantly. Murmurs ran through the benches, some laughing, some shaking their heads, others watching with keen interest. Even before Powell rose to reply, it was clear that the ground beneath her had shifted. She was no longer in control of the exchange. She was on the defensive before she had even spoken. And in the world of Commons debate, once you are seen as cornered, every move becomes harder. For Powell, the weight of expectation grew heavier with every passing moment. She needed to restore balance, to prove her strength, to show that Labour's position was not as weak as it was being made to look. But the challenge was already out there, sharp and public, and the reactions around the chamber confirmed what she surely already knew. This was going to be a battle she could not escape. The question now was not whether she could respond, but whether she could respond without losing her composure. The turning point came when an MP, not particularly known for fiery outbursts, but respected for his sharpness in debate, rose from his seat. There was no dramatic pause, no exaggerated gestures, just a steady confidence that immediately shifted attention across the chamber. His presence was calm, but his intent was unmistakable. He was not about to waste his chance on vague criticism or empty taunts. Instead, he carefully directed his focus toward Labour, and more specifically toward Lucy Powell. What made his challenge so effective was not only the content of his words, but the way he delivered them, measured, pointed, and impossible to dismiss. From the very first lines, it was clear that this was not going to be a routine exchange. He framed his attack in a way that placed Powell and her colleagues on the defensive before they even had time to prepare. The language he used was not filled with anger, but with cold precision, the kind of argument that does not shout but slices through carefully constructed defences. He accused Labour of failing to offer clarity, of speaking in broad promises without substance, and he highlighted Powell as the one standing in front of these weaknesses. It was a strategy designed not just to challenge her, but to corner her in a way that left no easy path out. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted quickly. Opposing MPs leaned back with smiles, clearly recognising that the attack had landed with force. Meanwhile, Labour MPs exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort visible as the words continued to flow. For them, this was not just another jab. This was a calculated dismantling of their frontbench presence. The MP speaking had drawn the spotlight so tightly onto Powell that she was left with no escape route. Every argument was framed to highlight her role, every sentence crafted to push her into a corner. As he spoke, the room seemed to shrink around Powell. She sat listening, her expression shifting from controlled calm to a tighter, more defensive posture. The challenge was direct, and it was being delivered in front of the nation. The MP questioned Labour's ability to lead, mocked the inconsistency of their positions, and used Powell's role as an example of a party unable to match words with action. The deliberate nature of the attack made it sting even more. It was not a burst of political theatre for the cameras. It was a calculated strike designed to expose weakness. Observers in the gallery and those watching on television could sense the discomfort. It was the kind of Commons moment that grows heavier with each passing second, as everyone realises something unusual is taking place. Normally, Powell could rely on the noise and support from her colleagues, but this time, the noise seemed muted. The silence between the words was telling, a sign that even those on her side could feel the strength of the challenge. Each sentence from the MP built upon the last, layering pressure on Powell until it was clear she would be forced to respond under circumstances that. What made this challenge stand out was how it broke from the expected rhythm of Commons debate. There was no dramatic flourish, no shouting match, no descent into chaos. Instead, it was delivered with the kind of calm force that cuts more deeply than volume ever could. Powell was not being attacked with noise, but with arguments that carried weight, facts sharpened into accusations, and a tone that suggested complete control. The humiliation was not in the words alone, but in the way Powell was made to sit and absorb them while the chamber watched. In politics, image is everything, and in this moment, Powell's image was being reshaped in real time. Instead of the composed frontbencher, she appeared as a target under siege, someone struggling to hold her ground while the attack unfolded. The MP's words were aimed not just at undermining Labour's policies, but at undermining her credibility as a spokesperson. Every second she waited to respond only added to the impression that she was being pinned down, unable to escape the challenge being thrown at her. By the time the MP finished, the chamber had already made up its mind. The sharpness of the remarks, the precision of the attack, and the discomfort it created for Labour MPs left no doubt about its impact. Powell had been singled out, and she would have to carry the weight of that moment. The challenge had been unexpected, but its effect was immediate and lasting. It left Powell not only with the burden of responding, but also with the task of repairing the image that had just been shaken before the eyes of her colleagues, her opponents, and the watching public. The silence that followed the MP's cutting remarks lasted only a moment, but it was long enough to make everyone in the chamber aware of how heavily the words had landed. Lucy Powell, usually confident and steady in such situations, shifted in her seat before rising to answer. She knew she had to respond, not only for herself, but for her party. The eyes of her colleagues, the smirks of her opponents, and the attention of the speaker all converged on her. The weight of expectation pressed down heavily as she began her reply. From the first line, Powell's tone was firm but carried a sharp edge, a hint of the frustration building beneath her controlled exterior. She tried to deflect the accusations by pointing out Labour's record and by questioning the credibility of the MP who had spoken. She attempted to turn the attack back on him, to expose weaknesses in his argument and to reclaim authority in the debate. But the chamber's mood had already shifted, and each word seemed to echo with less force than she intended. Her defence was not weak in substance, but the delivery betrayed the pressure she was under. The MP who had struck first did not sit back quietly. As Powell spoke, he interrupted with brief remarks, nodding with mock politeness, and occasionally letting out a laugh that carried across the benches. Every gesture added to the perception that Powell was not in control. When she attempted to raise her voice, it sounded less like strength and more like irritation. The chamber thrives on such moments, the clash of voices, the quick back and forth, and this time, it was Powell who seemed to be chasing the debate rather than commanding it. As the exchange deepened, the imbalance became clearer. Powell spoke of Labour's vision, its plans, and its priorities, but her words were constantly being punctured by the sharp responses of her opponent. His counterpoints were quick, delivered without hesitation, and they struck at the very points Powell was trying to defend. Each interruption unsettled her rhythm. Each comment drew murmurs and reactions from the benches, and each rebuttal seemed to weaken the ground beneath her feet. It was not just a debate anymore. It was a struggle for control in front of a room eager for spectacle. Those watching could see Powell's composure beginning to slip. Her facial expressions tightened, her hands gestured more forcefully, and her voice carried a tone that betrayed her irritation. In Parliament, emotion can be a strength when used with precision, but when it spills over, it becomes a weapon for the opponent. The more Powell displayed her frustration, the more the chamber reacted, with laughter from some MPs and quiet nods of approval from others. Her attempt to project confidence was overshadowed by the perception that she was losing her balance. The MP across from her seized on this shift with practiced skill. He repeated key phrases, driving his points home with relentless clarity. He framed Powell's responses as evasions, mocked her for not giving direct answers, and portrayed Labour's position as weak and hollow. What made the attack sting was not just its content, but its delivery. He spoke as though he were the one in control of the entire chamber, while Powell's words seemed reactive, defensive, and increasingly emotional. The contrast could not have been sharper. The chamber fed off the energy of the exchange. Supporters of the MP cheered him on, while Labour MPs sat stiffly, some whispering amongst themselves, others staring straight ahead in silence. Powell's allies wanted her to land a decisive blow, something that would cut through the noise and restore her authority. But every attempt to do so was blunted by the speed and precision of her opponent's replies. It was as though the harder she tried, the more the balance tilted against her. The broadcast cameras captured everything, every pause, every strained smile, every interruption. For viewers, it was not simply a policy debate unfolding, but a dramatic contest of willpower and composure. Powell's frustration was visible, and the MP's confidence only seemed to grow with each passing minute. What was meant to be an exchange of ideas had transformed into a moment of humiliation, as Powell found herself on the receiving end of relentless pressure. By the end of the back and forth, it was clear to all in the chamber who had controlled the exchange. Powell had spoken with energy. She had defended her party with determination, but her words had been overshadowed by the sharpness of her opponent's challenge and the reactions it provoked. The image left in the minds of those watching was not of a strong Labour defence, but of a senior figure rattled, frustrated, and visibly struggling. The House of Commons had once again turned into a theatre of spectacle, and in this scene, Powell had not emerged as the victor.